everybody, and welcome to another recap of today's action at the World Championship Finals. Jan Nepomniachtchi playing against Magnus Carlsen. Today was Game 5. Jan Nepomniachtchi with the white pieces. Was he going to inflict his first victory over Magnus? Was Magnus going to get off to a winning start? Or was it going to be the fifth draw in a row? As it turned out, it was indeed another draw. And in this game, Jan Nepomniachtchi was not caught off guard by a slightly rare line played by Magnus in an anti-martial. Jan kind of knew what he was doing, and there was just a half moment, I would say, where he could have made life slightly more difficult for Magnus. Wasn't able to find the correct way, and then Magnus managed to park the bus, as Jose Mourinho would say, hold the fort, and draw the game. 5 draws. There's not really been, still, in my opinion, a proper decisive moment. There were some moments, perhaps, that were on the edge, but today certainly wasn't one of them. White was slightly better, maybe even more than slightly better at some point, but Jan just unable to find the way. And I'm going to be analysing the game using the GChess platform. And I'm going to be showing you all, of course, the interactive features of this wonderful platform. So the game started out e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and the Spanish bishop b5. We've seen this already. a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, Spanish mainline, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, castles. Now, we've already seen h3, and we've seen a4 with this time with bishop b7. Jan did decide to go a4 once again, but instead of bishop b7 this time, Magnus Carlsen played the move rook to b8, which is probably something like the third most played move in this position. Bishop b7 or pawn to b4 are far more played, but rook to b8, Magnus has played it. Now, as we can see, because I do want to highlight some of the great features on GChess, the move rook b8, if we go all the way back to a4 or maybe here, we can see that, if you want to find something in the Chessable course, you can find a short and sweet version. Logosar's E4 repertoire, Chess Publishing, has got all kinds of games in this particular position, obviously because it's an anti-martial. If we go here, you can see here, if you become a Chess Publishing subscriber, if you are a subscriber, you can see here all of these annotated lines, fantastic, on the anti-martial. Alternatively, you can click here in all the new in chess articles that feature the anti-martial, games that are played online, the week in chess, and so on and so forth. So this is why GChess, in my opinion, has got the potential to become the place to look at chess games, analyze chess games, because you've got all of these fantastic tools to cross-reference. Even this encyclopedia, you can see here as well, is there. Okay, so rook b8, what have we got? Well, we've actually got a Jan Nepomniachtchi game. Jan Nepomniachtchi online is La Chessesque. So he played this in 2017, so he's well aware of this. Rook b8 has been played by Magnus Carlsen already against Jan Krzysztof Duda in the World Cup. So this move really cannot come as a surprise to Jan Nepomniachtchi, and he played very, very quickly thereafter. Okay, so after rook b8, the game went a takes b5, which is already, quite a natural move, because now you take control of the a file, so it makes a lot of sense. And here Jan played the move h3. This move is always going to be a useful move. It doesn't really matter whether you play h3 here or if you go c3 first. You're getting into the same kind of stuff. So the game went h3, d6, very standard, and c3. Jan spending almost no time here. We now get into a more well-known position. And this is where Magnus also didn't spend much time, played the move pawn to b4, trying to open up the b file for his rook. And here, white played the move d3, and this is where we get to reasonably novel territory. As you can see, no games on chess.com, no games on Lee Chess. So we get to an important moment. And Jan, again, playing relatively quickly. He doesn't play d4 here, predominantly because after d4, black's able to exchange a pair of pawns, exchange another pair, and now play this classic counter in the center with d5. And after e5, knight to e4, as you can see, I've switched on the engine bar here. It seems as though, black is doing just fine here, to be brutally honest. Seems as though the knight on e4 is very well posted. The bishop is a very, very loose piece here on b3. And this is very different compared to other Spanish lines where you can get positions like this with e5, knight e4. But in this position, the bishop is just too loose, and black is doing more than fine here. Which is why Jan Nepomniachtchi played d3. Magnus took, and he took back with pawn takes e3, and Magnus played d5 anyway. So he's striking in the center while he can, which was met by knight b to d2. Should be pointed out that e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes e5 does win a pawn for the moment, but after knight takes e5, rook takes e5, and bishop e6, you have to be very, very careful here not to land in huge trouble as white. This looks like a typical marshal, except that there's a lot more fragility in the white position. Knight takes c3 is already a threat, which is clearly a big issue. And bishop f6 is also on the cards. So, for example, rook e1 already runs into knight takes c3, and the bishop on b3 hangs. Jan Nepomniachtchi not interested in any of that, instead plays the move knight b to d2, which was met by the move d takes e4 and d takes e4. Again, Jan playing at basically not using any time at all. And this is where Magnus now plays a very solid move, bishop to d6. Very standard move here, overprotecting the e5 pawn, and also perhaps making a way for this knight to come to the king side. Because if you look in this position here, the only bad piece that black really has is this knight being dominated by one solo pawn here on c3. So bishop d6. Here Jan played a logical move, queen to c2, pawn to h6, very standard stuff, and now knight to f1. So Jan employing the standard Spanish maneuver with knight f1, knight g3, knight to e7 played by Carlsen, knight g3, and knight g6. So both knights found their way to the king side, and Jan finally connects the rooks with bishop to e3. So far, so good. Here, Magnus plays the first move, which I think can be considered. The engine gives it as the first line, but I think it can be considered as a slight inaccuracy. And that's the move queen e8. And this is where Jan had his moment. Queen e8 is designed so that he can play bishop e6 and recapture on e6. Also, sometimes the queen finds its way out to c6. As you can see, the engine is spewing a few lines there, rook a5, knight d2, for example. But as it turns out, in this position here, Jan had the opportunity to play the unusual looking move pawn to c4, which threatens the move pawn to c5, which would win this bishop, or rather not win it, but it would make it retreat, and this pawn would be a killer pawn. Just for example, bishop d7, c5, bishop to e7. The black pieces are suddenly uber cramped. In fact, now you have to worry about some knight f5 moves because there might be some issues down the e file. And if you have to start playing moves like knight h8, you know things have gone terribly wrong. In fact, here, even after knight f4, you can just take on e5 here, winning a pawn, and this knight is loose. So c4 would set a serious problem to Magnus, who would have to deal with c5. And if he were to play the move bishop b4, attacking the rook, and I think this is the reason why Jan rejected this move, I think the idea is that he just thought that after, let's say, rook d1, you can play the move c5, and uh, you're kind of doing okay here as black. You've managed to block everything up sufficiently well, and there's no easy way to get the knights to the, some key squares here. But after bishop to b4, as it turns out, rook e to b1 would have been extremely promising. And the point is now that after c5, you can hit this queen with bishop to a4. And if the queen goes, let's say, queen to e7, let's just say a natural move, you can now float this bishop onto c6. And believe it or not, this is a really nice maneuver. The point is that now the bishop can sometimes sit on d5. And it's very difficult for black to actually do something productive here. For example, after, let's say, queen c7, bishop d5, you don't really ever want to take, I guess, because after c takes d5, you now have access to an isolated pawn. You've got the c4 square potentially for a knight, typical knight maneuver. You've got a protected pass pawn in the middle, and all of a sudden the position looks very promising for white. So after the move c4, I think that Jan would have had just that little bit between his teeth to try and push and to try and force the issue here. And he didn't find it. And I think once he didn't find that move, the initiative had slipped between his hands. Instead, he played the move rook e to d1, which is, of course, a fine move, but just not critical. And now Magnus was able to complete development with bishop a6, bishop a4, and offered the bishop trade with bishop d7. And after this, we actually got a mass trade. Jan went knight d2, Magnus took. So a bunch of pieces come off the board. Magnus once again goes with the rook to a8 in order to exchange some more pieces off the board. A very, very logical move. And there's nothing that really Jan can do to avoid further trade downs. And that's what happened. He went rook d to a1, rook takes a4, rook takes a4, and now Magnus took the b file with the rook, so got his rook active. And I think Magnus must have been extremely happy about this. White is still ever so slightly better because the bishop is worse than this bishop. White has got access to the f5 square, but it's just not enough to beat somebody as strong as Magnus. And it's very difficult to outmaneuver him here. So Jan played rook a6, and this is where Magnus actually showed a beautiful little maneuver, double knight maneuver, rejigging his knights to provide some solidity to his position. So he plays knight e8, overprotecting d6, anticipating knight f5, and after king f1, very logical, bringing the king towards the center. Now this knight came to f8, with the clear idea of posting on e6, from which it guards c7, guards f4. It's just a very, very useful knight. And in fact, after knight f5, Magnus just said, I'm not worried about anything. Knight to e6, knight to c4, putting as much pressure on d6 as possible, but Magnus just said, I'm still not bothered. How are you going to win? Rook d8, f3, and now f6. Magnus also saying, it doesn't matter that I put all my pawns on dark squares. I'm not aiming to do anything particularly special with this bishop. I just want to overprotect my position. Pawns are, they are symmetrical pretty much. So there's no there's no leverage there when it comes to pawns, and I'm just going to play very solidly. And actually, there's just not much to report. The game went g4, king f7, h4, Magnus retreated bishop f8, king e2, and finally Magnus was now able to exchange a pair of pieces off the board, which as the defending side you should often want to do. Try and get pieces off the board. Knight takes d6 and bishop takes d6, no bother. And after h5, looks as though white has achieved a lot because he's fixed these pawns. But after bishop f8, this knight on e6 combined with the bishop on f8 means that the weakness is overprotected sufficiently. The knight does a wonderful job of protecting c7, so there's no rook a7 business going on. And in fact, white just doesn't have enough artillery to make something happen here. So it went rook a5. Magnus played king e8, anticipating rook d5, and now rook a8. This was an excellent little maneuver by Magnus. Now there's no rook d7 stuff. King does a great job of protecting against that. Jan played rook d1, and then Magnus found no other way to continue except give check. And then there was a repetition via these moves here, after which they then agreed a draw on move 43 here. What to say about this game? Well, you know, Jan had a moment. And when you play the greatest of all times, it's those moments that you need to find or take advantage of if you're going to win the World Championship match. That moment was playing c4, where I do believe White had some serious initiative and was probably better, right around here on move 20. Nonetheless, it would have still been a long game. It's not as if the game was over here, far from it. But a half chance missed by Jan Nepomniachtchi, and after that, really, the game just fizzled out very quickly. So tomorrow's game 6. Magnus now with the white pieces. He'll be very happy with the draw today, by the way. He'll be extremely happy that he wasn't pressurized as much as Jan should have pressurized him. And so he's going to be thinking, wow, it would be a great moment to get a win just before we approach halfway in this tournament. And that's all for now. Make sure you get onto GChess. Make sure you get yourself a proper subscription. You've got all these tools available to you. You can become a world-class opening player just by using GChess alone. I'm really looking forward to using it. It's so simple and it's so slick. And it has links to all my favorite websites. Chess Publishing, New in Chess, obviously the Chessable courses, all of this stuff. It's absolutely great. Make sure you get that premium subscription. For now, though, from me, it's goodbye. Hope you enjoyed that game. See you on the next one. Cheers.